Hi, everyone. Welcome to Indivisible's first ever Indivisible digital town hall. We are so excited to have you joining us here tonight. We're going to give it a few seconds for folks to come in, and then we will get started in just a minute. Actually, we'll go ahead and get started now. I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Leah Greenberg. I'm the co-executive director of Indivisible, and I'm super pleased to be here tonight moderating this town hall with Arati Kreibich, who's running for Congress in New Jersey's 3rd district, New Jersey's 5th district, and with Melanie D'Arrigo, who is running for Congress in New York's 3rd district. Now, just for a little bit of background on me before we get started, I'm the co-executive director of Indivisible. I'm a former congressional staffer. I got my start on Capitol Hill working for a progressive member of Congress representing a swing district. And while I was there, I saw a little of what everyone on this call probably knows. Washington is broken. Corporations have armies of lobbyists and PACs and tight relationships across Congress. Popular common sense policy solutions on gun violence, on climate change, on healthcare go nowhere. People are locked out of the process. You only have to look at the latest round of COVID relief package bill negotiations to see how broken this is. Millions of people are out of jobs and small businesses are struggling desperately. State governments are having to lay off firefighters and teachers. And meanwhile, the cruise industry and payday loans are getting bailouts. This didn't start with Donald Trump. It's not going to end when we beat him in November 2020. It's going to end when we elect the kind of principled leaders who will change the system instead of getting cozy with it. And that is why I am so excited to be here tonight with two rising leaders, women who are running grassroots campaigns to demand change. Arati Kreibich is a scientist, an immigrant, and a Glen Rock Borough Council member running in New Jersey's 5th district, just outside of New York City. Melanie D'Arrigo is a healthcare advocate and progressive organizer running in New York's 3rd district on Long Island. They are running people-powered campaigns fueled by the enthusiasm of the grassroots, not corporate money. And they're challenging two members of Congress who have gotten comfortable with Washington and who practice the kind of bipartisanship where both parties just agree to do what corporations want. They're leading members of something called the Problem Solvers Caucus, which sounds great, right? Who doesn't want to solve problems? But we're going to dig a little deeper tonight because it turns out that the problem solvers are mostly interested in solving the problems of rich people. Right now, for example, in the middle of the worst economic crisis in history, they are focused on a bailout for the payday loan industry. I don't think that's what the people of New York or New Jersey want. So tonight we're going to talk about what's going wrong in Washington, but we're also going to talk about what's possible with new leadership. We're going to talk about the kind of policies we can fight for together and how to shake things up, because together we have the power to do that. Now, we're also going to be taking questions from the audience, so please be sure to pop your questions in the Zoom chat as they're coming up for you. We're going to try and shout those out as we go along. We'll be watching the chat box. Just be sure to pop any questions you have in as you're seeing those. But I'm going to kick off with a question that's on something that's on everyone's minds right now and on all of our hearts. Both of your districts have been hit pretty hard by the coronavirus pandemic. How are your communities doing?
Do you want to go ahead, RTL?
Sure. So we're in North Jersey, and particularly in Bergen County, which makes up 75% of the electorate for NJ-05. I will say that we're one of the worst hits, definitely the worst hit in New Jersey, second to New York City, I think, in terms of the kinds of folks that we're seeing who are sick, who are continuing to get sick. And thank goodness, it seems like we're kind of over the curve for the pandemic. But at the end of the day, we have so many people who have lost hours, who've lost jobs, who can't make rent, may not be able to make mortgages. And our communities are frankly reeling, I think. We just are trying to hold on. And what this pandemic is showing us, what has shown us over the last 2 months for sure, are the deep inequities that have already existed and that are completely exacerbated by this crisis. And what's showing me for sure is how much we need a stronger social safety net if we really want a more resilient future.
Yeah, and in my district, we've also seen the inequities. My congressional district is in the top 5 greatest wealth inequality gaps in the country. And the news headlines that we're reading are certainly true. We're seeing that the wealthy are faring far better than marginalized populations and the poor. We also have a very large undocumented population here in my district, and we are seeing increased rates of homelessness. We are seeing increased rates of job loss and increased rates of hunger. And right now, what we've had to do is really form coalitions with other community groups and start food collecting and really supplying food for hungry families because they don't have the ability to access certain benefits. So, we are the really the second hotspot in the nation outside of New York City and Queens. Northeastern Queens is part of my district. Elmhurst, Queens was the epicenter of it all. They were bringing refrigerator trucks to hold the bodies. This is a very, very serious pandemic. Right now, as you likely know, Governor Cuomo's become quite famous for his daily briefings. He's talking about potentially reopening New York City and upstate New York on this Friday, actually, May 15th. We will not be ready to do that in Long Island because our numbers still continue to climb. So we're very much social distancing, still wearing masks, etc. And it's really affecting, everyone in the district. Even, I'm a mom of 3, so we're learning how to homeschool at home right now. But that's really the least of our worries here in our district.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And now I'd like to pull the lens back a little bit and learn, for everyone to learn a little bit more about each of y'all. So Arati, Melanie, could you tell us each a bit about your background and why you decided to run for Congress?
Sure. So I'm a mom. I'm a neuroscientist by training. I'm an elected official, as you mentioned. I was elected to Glen Rock Council, and I'm a proud immigrant and a naturalized citizen. I think all of those perspectives make up who I am. For me, getting involved in politics in this particular way was really something that happened because of the 2016 election. It was actually you and Ezra and the Indivisible guide that started me on this path of activism as I was reeling and trying to figure out what to do, after the election. And how this happened and what we could possibly do. And the galvanizing event for me was my son, who was 8 years old, who, in the wake of the election, as the hate crimes were spiking, and as people were starting to feel a lot more insecure, he was really worried that I was going to be somehow deported, that, I was going to be targeted, and the fact that I'm an immigrant was going to be weaponized against me, and particularly against my parents, who, sound a lot less or a lot more like they're not born in America. For me, that was devastating, right? As a parent, to have your child feel this insecure about you. But really, it was about the fact that I could hug him, I could reassure him. But at the end of the day, there were so many parents who couldn't do that with their kids. And there's so many more people in our communities who feel so much more vulnerable and so much more insecure than they ever have. Either because of the way they look or who they love or, what they sound like. And so to me, that was just, I couldn't just sit back anymore, which is really when I started marching and organizing and decided that I needed to run for council. For me, the event for running for Congress had a lot to do with the fact that I supported my Congress member in 2016. I was really hoping that when he won, he was going to be the glimmer of hope. We had a president that, was awful, that I did not realize quite how awful it was going to be. But I thought we had somebody fighting in our corner when he went to Washington. Not only has he not done that, but from his very first vote, when he proceeded to vote to roll back Obama-era regulations on health and the environment, he has not just disappointed, but really undermined the real democratic policies that we're fighting for, really undermined the kinds of things that he was sent to Washington to do. So for me, I supported him reluctantly in 2018. I really believe that we need to keep this district blue. But at the end of the day, it has a lot to do with understanding and realizing that what we need in our district is a real Democrat, is somebody who's actually going to be fighting for real change, who's actually going to be doing something about climate change, about the healthcare system, and doing this by not taking corporate PAC money or fossil fuel money. And so this is why I'm running, because our district deserves a lot better than it has. And I think those values cut across party lines. It has nothing to do with it being a Democrat or Republican at the end of the day. It's about having people who are going to be fighting for bold structural changes on the behalf of the people and the constituents in your district. So.
I love to hear all these stories of these powerful women running for office and thread the needle of how we have so much in common. For me, I worked as an allied health professional. I have a master's of science. I loved my career. I worked with patients and families and organizations, building health improvement programs and risk reduction programs. And I was really one of those fortunate people to really love what I did. And when Trump was elected, it was the scientist in me, Arati, you can probably relate to this, but the scientist in me realized, well, if I didn't see this coming, and I really truly was shocked. I was not one of those people that thought that would happen at all. I figured, well, what's the solution? How do we work our way out of this one? So I figured if I could start stepping up more with organizations that I had been previously involved with and became more available to my community to engage more folks, then maybe we could prevent and sort of counteract some of the hateful administration. So kind of right out of the Indivisible playbook, right? And, so I started initially working with Moms Demand Action and Planned Parenthood. And then I set my sights on bigger things. I helped organize the Women's March in Atlanta in 2018. I started organizing protests and actions. And from there, I started helping elect Democrats, because I thought that if we elected Democrats, well, surely they would represent democratic values. And like Arati, I even handed out palm cards for my opponent in the last election cycle. And through this journey, the deeper I got into it, I started to realize that unless we elected representatives who wanted to change, who wanted to fight for democratic values, we were never going to get it. I think, there were sort of two defining moments for me. The first was the Kavanaugh hearings. I had gone down to protest. I'm a survivor. So it had hit me really, really personally. It was visceral for me. I was down in DC the day of the final vote. I was there with my family, my little girls. They had just turned 8 and 4. My son was in a stroller. And I will never forget that moment. I was standing at the foot of the Supreme Court. I'm holding my little girl's hands in mine, and I'm filling with anger, a fire in my belly. I'm standing there thinking, how could we let this happen? How could we get here? And I'm looking around, and I know that I should be filled with complete despair, but I see thousands of people all around me, lifting each other up, consoling each other, arm in arm, hand in hand, chanting, singing, forming human chains. And something in me shifted in that moment. In that very moment, I knew that if we were going to push against this hate, this absolute spitting in the face of the most marginalized, it was going to require so much more of me, so much more of everyone. And so when I got back to New York, I really started digging into my representative's record, because I had noticed he was completely silent during the hearings. And the more I discovered, the more I realized he didn't represent me. Like Arati's opponent, he also voted to roll back Dodd-Frank, weakening banking regulations, making the markets riskier. Of course, it made his corporate donors much wealthier, but at what expense? At the expense of the middle class. He was one of the only Democrats in the party to break with the party to support ICE. He called a path to citizenship a third rail. After he visited the border, he said that we should fully fund ICE and Customs and Border Patrol. This is supposed to be a Democrat. And we'll get into more of the policies in a little bit, but essentially the more I looked, the more I realized this was not someone that I could sit by and let run under the Democratic moniker and represent our district. The day he told me he didn't read the bill, that was supposed to go toward expanding funding for humanitarian aid at the border, but really expanded detention centers, was the final straw for me. And that's the day that I decided I had no choice, that I had to run. And now I'm running, and that's why I'm here tonight. So I'm so pleased to be here, Leah. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you both. And thank you both for stepping forward. As Arati said, our district deserved better. And that is such a powerful, simple statement. And it's what brings us all together tonight, because each of these districts do deserve better. On that note, that's a great segue to my next question, which is, you're both running against Democratic incumbents who are co-chairs of the Problem Solvers Caucus. We know members of this caucus claim their bipartisan approach and reaching across the aisle is delivering for their constituents, but that's not really the case, is it? Can you tell us a little bit more about what this caucus is and whether it's actually delivering for the folks in your district? And whoever wants to jump in.
Sure. So I'll take this one first, if that's okay, Arati. So the Problem Solvers Caucus, theoretically, as you mentioned, is a caucus that works toward bipartisanship. Hey, that's the dream, right? Except under a Trump administration, it's virtually impossible to have that in good faith. It is comprised of equal percentage of Republicans and conservative Democrats. And one only has to look at the facts to see who they are fighting for, who they are solving problems for. In fact, the two key pieces of legislation that they have passed really favored Republicans. You know, many of us worked really, really hard in 2018 so that we could flip the House. You know, we did this in my district because we thought that Democrats would be a check on Trump. Instead, my opponent has acted like a welcome mat. You know, one of the very first things they did when we won back the House was hold up Nancy Pelosi's speakership. And they negotiated a rules change that weakened Democratic power in the House and strengthened the GOP's power. Why? We had just worked so hard to get the teeniest sliver of a check back on this really just egregious administration who was trampling, you know, metaphorically ripping up the Constitution and trampling on laughing in the face of the face of law. So, you know, that was the first big piece key of legislation that they passed. Secondly, you know, I mentioned just a minute ago the emergency border funding bill. Many folks don't know this, but initially there was a bill that was passed in the House that had about 10 protections for immigrants in the bill. Things like really providing humanitarian aid, providing food and medicine and water and legal services. So the bill went to the Senate. No surprise, Mitch McConnell did his thing. He stripped out all of the protections, sent the bill back to the House. Now, Nancy Pelosi had been working all day to try to get some of the protections put back in. I mean, after all, the whole point of the bill was to provide humanitarian aid. The Problem Solvers Caucus and the Blue Dog Dems, which is another conservative Dem group in Congress, went to Nancy Pelosi and said, we will not vote for your bill. We are only voting for Mitch McConnell's bill. Now, of course, this happened to be right before 4th of July vacation. So your guess is as good as mine, whether or not they wanted to do the work or they just wanted to go on vacation. But I don't think any Democrat in good faith could sit there and say that this is good for Democrats, that this is a caucus that's fighting for Democrats, because they are not. And if we look and see how they're funded, we know they're funded by No Labels, which is a dark money group comprised of, well, billionaire Republicans. So we know when wealthy donors and corporations donate money, they expect a return on their investment. And that's exactly what the Problem Solvers have been giving them.
I agree completely. I think Melanie has shared a great summary of exactly why both of us are completely incensed by the Problem Solvers Caucus, as I'm sure a lot of members of Indivisible are. But for us, it's personal, right? Being in this district and understanding really how little representation there is for the people who are here, for working families, for middle-class families, for poor folks who are in here. There's just really no representation. Every single bill that they pass has everything to do with the undue influence of corporate money in our politics, and has very little to do with what politics and government should be about, which is about representing the people, which is about making sure that we are taking care of everybody, and especially taking care of the most vulnerable. So Melanie mentioned the CPPI's bill, right? And that particularly was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. For me, it was, we had just started seeing all of these all of these news reports about how we were breaking apart families, how we were putting kids in cages, how they weren't even getting toothbrushes and blankets. Weeks later, this bill came up, emergency appropriations bill. And the fact that my Congress member stood there and pretty much stripped it of all guardrails and all accountability made me morally complicit in this humanitarian crisis. That's how I saw it, because I was a supporter of his. And when he stood there and he did this, he made us all morally complicit in this decision making. And I will say that at the end of the day, you can think what you want of comprehensive immigration reform. You can have different thoughts about, how we deal with undocumented folks, but all Americans understand that we have a humanitarian crisis at the border. We understand what our role is and what our responsibility is to families and kids that are across the border. And for him to do that with no accountability was egregious. And this is not bringing anything back. Most folks in my district, most folks across the US find that this is egregious. So that's just one small example of the Problem Solvers Caucus, right? So we have representatives in office who continue to build power for corporations over and over again. It has to do with corporate PAC money. It has to do with where they're coming from. And there's a straight line from trying to roll back Dodd-Frank regulations, which we got in place after the last economic collapse, which my district hasn't fully recovered from, and is in even graver trouble with pandemic crisis that we're all going through. So to roll back Dodd-Frank regulations, to then also, for my Congress member, for example, is one of 8 Democrats nationwide who has voted with Trump against the Iran war powers resolution as well. I think that's part of the larger whole when we're talking about the foreign policy in general. And he is one of the Democrats who voted the most with Trump. So he's voted in 2018, 77% of the time with Trump. His first term alone, he voted 55% of the time with Trump. Not sure what he's doing for the rest of us in NJ-05, but it sure isn't going to bat for us. Recently, actually just last week, it came out that he is lobbying on behalf of private equity firms, which are basically like payday lenders for small businesses, while at the same time pocketing all their cash. There's a direct line to trying to make the markets a little bit unstable, a little bit more unsafe, so that we can, again, have more cash going into the pockets of corporations. And that's essentially, in a nutshell, what the Problem Solvers Caucus is about. It's causing more problems, as you mentioned, Melanie. It's definitely not solving them. Or if they are, then I don't know who they're solving them for. And it matters, right? It matters who you're solving problems for. It matters whether it's for the everyday people or it's just to heighten our income inequality that we have.
Absolutely. And I think that really hits on, you both hit on something that I think is really important for folks to understand about the Problem Solvers Caucus. It's not just about taking bad votes. They are definitely taking some bad votes. They're voting with Trump on some of these things. It's also about undermining Democratic unity when Democrats are trying to push back against Trump. So it's not just about, we're voting the wrong way. It's about working to undermine, for example, Speaker Pelosi's hands when they're trying to get restrictions on the concentration camps that DHS was putting in place at the border. And that was a really searing example, I think, for a lot of Indivisible groups, because in the exact moment when folks were showing up all over the country to demand something be done about concentration camps that were happening at the border, there was a group of Democrats in Congress who were actively trying to give DHS, give ICE and CBP a free hand. That's not what our values are. That's not what we stand for. And as you said, the folks who get left out when they're trying to solve problems are the people who are not their donors. And on that note, both of y'all are running Rejecting Corporate PAC Money, and your opponents are significant recipients of corporate donations. Tell me, why is it important to your campaign to reject corporate PAC money? Melanie, would you like to go first?
Sure, absolutely. As I just mentioned, when corporations donate to campaigns, they very simply do it because they are expecting a return on their investment. They're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. And we see this with industry after industry after industry. And it's really the single biggest impediment to progress. And right now, I think we are seeing a whole new class of candidates pushing against this. We're standing up and saying, this is not the way it has to be. We only want to represent the people of our district. That's who I want to be accountable for, and two, I'm not taking a single cent of PAC money for one very simple reason. My policies are not for sale. We have seen this time and time again with our electeds who, they shrug responsibility, or they try to hide it within the problem solvers caucus, not wanting to tell us our true vote and blaming it on the whole. Just have some integrity, have some morality, and tell us who you are fighting for. Unfortunately, when you see representatives break with their party, break with democratic values, and it benefits their corporate donor, what else are we left to think? My opponent has been very clear on this. He does not think it's hypocritical, and he's very proud to take over $1 million in corporate money. I don't think that's the way it should be. And I think, the more folks realize that these representatives are legislating for corporations and not for us, I think the better off we'll be. But that is a long education process. I've actually introduced the Paid By Act, which stands for Politician Accountability Information's Disclosures Benefiting You. It's a mouthful, but it's an acronym that would essentially introduce transparency into this process. And it would force an elected or a candidate to disclose where they're taking money from before a key vote or in any advertisement. Because I really do think until we're able to overturn Citizens United, we need a real strong education push to really show folks that aren't paying that much attention, folks that aren't reading the bills that we're reading, to include them in the process so they know who their representatives are fighting for.
Yeah, I agree with you, Melanie. I think that at the end of the day, when you are the recipient of lots and lots of donations from corporations, those are exactly the policies that you're going to be fighting for, which, as I said, is the antithesis of what government should be about. I'm not taking a single penny of corporate PAC money because I think it's the right thing to do. I think that's what we need to do as elected officials. Simply put, that's it at the end of the day. Corporate money and the undue influence of corporate money has stymied all major policy changes that we've tried to do, right? I mean, Citizens United, I will say, has been one of the worst things to happen to American politics. I think that not only do we need to end it, we need to move to amend and make sure it doesn't happen in the future. All the major things. So let's take climate change, for example, right? So even in the 80s, right, we had a push to have policies in place that would significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We were talking about global warming back then. We were talking about the kinds of things we could do. There was a push. There was a movement in Congress. And then we had fossil fuel companies come in and completely annihilate that entire movement. And that happened because of the influence of corporate money coming in and lobbyists coming in, and the kinds of things that should have happened didn't. And even then, we were behind the 8 ball, right? So now we are now in 2020 with less than a decade to be able to do something collectively and decisively about climate change. And again, we are running around trying to figure out what we can possibly do, as this is an urgent existential crisis that is here, and that everybody realizes is here and is having a significant impact. And if we think this pandemic is a shock to the system, we have public health crises that are going to come down the pike as climate change worsens, and we need to be aware of that. So to have things like the crazy influence and really, undue influence of corporate money in our political system is going to completely stymie any and all progress that we make. So it's really important that we have elected officials who are not beholden to corporations and who are really only beholden to the people.
Right. And sorry, I just want to jump in because I think this is really relevant to where we are in today's pandemic. We've recently seen that the Fed has loosened regulations where now oil companies are allowed to access loans. You've probably caught today, Democrats are now ready to vote on a new stimulus bill, which once again prioritizes mostly corporations. Yeah. What we've seen is the insurance lobbyists hand Nancy Pelosi a portion of a bill to pass, which includes subsidies for COBRA payments. So wonderful that that will help folks that maybe lost their job who had insurance, but it does nothing for folks who didn't have insurance. It does nothing for contract and freelance workers, and it does nothing to help poor people access insurance. And, you know, perhaps most mind-blowingly egregious about this new bill is that it's going to include a provision so that lobbyists, you heard it right, corporate lobbyists can access the Paycheck Protection Program. It's absolutely the upside down. It's backwards. If we're going to contain this virus, we need to take care of people. That should be the true intent of government. It should be to look after and take care of people. Maybe you can get a scrap or two way down the line. This is life or death right now.
I will say that, you know, added to that completely, like when you look at the entire stimulus packages that we've had, all of them have been weighted towards corporate bailouts. And hardly any of them. I mean, it's if you give something to the people, you know that you've given 10, 100 times more to corporations. And this is not where we need to be at the end of the day, especially in the middle of a pandemic crisis when people are not sure where their next meal is coming from. People are not sure if they can pay rent and actually have a house, let alone, you know, if they're going to be able to survive this infection, or if they're able to be taking care of their healthcare for the long term. So this is, you know, when I started off talking about how COVID-19 has exposed these deep inequities, we see that in the process. And what leverage do we as Democrats have when we have Problem Solvers Caucus completely undermining any and all power that we might have as a bloc at every single turn? They've done it for years. They continue to do it. They will continue to do it moving forward unless we hold them accountable.
Exactly. I completely agree with both of y'all's points. And I will say, as somebody who was in Congress during the Great Recession, the parallels are really eerie, right? During that time, millions of people lost their homes and banks got a big bailout. And right now, the weight of the relief packages are going to big corporations versus to regular people. And it feels a little bit like we're seeing history repeat itself. And just to underscore Arati's point, the fact of the matter is, because you have this block of Democrats in Congress who will just say, you know, we're not going to vote against anything that's ambitious. We're not going to vote against anything that's got too big a price tag. We're not going to vote against anything that includes immigrants, or that has controversial stuff that we don't want to, that we're worried about. There's just an upward bound limit on what Democrats can accomplish. And it is really important that that kind of thing not be rewarded in a Democratic caucus. And that's why it is so important that these folks are facing challenges and that they have to explain themselves to their constituents. So I'm going to go to a question from the audience. Tora asks, hi there, what's the best part of being a community advocate, and what advice would you give to young folks who have a passion for public service?
Well, I think the best part about being a community advocate is meeting so many different folks in your community and learning the different perspectives and issues that are that your broad community is facing. I think that's truly the best part. Advice that I have for young people that want to get involved is to get involved. Call campaigns. We always need help. I'm sure Arati needs volunteers. I need volunteers. Just get involved. Start showing up. Go to community meetings. If there are particular issues that you are passionate about, find groups in your area. Join your local Indivisible group, and just start showing up. And then from there, the sky's the limit.
I will echo what Melanie said. I think the best part about being community advocate, absolutely 100% for me, is meeting people and shedding light on unmet needs and stories that maybe I didn't know, but I know for sure that the greater community maybe is not aware of. And that to me is really, really important, because we have so many voices that need to be amplified, and so many folks that really need to be held up and lifted up. And so for me, I think that's one of the best things to do. And how to get involved, agreed 100%. Join any of our campaigns, join your Indivisible group. I will say that for me, it was really important not to feel somehow, just start where you are. Don't feel as if you're behind. Don't feel as if you need to catch up. Wherever you are, wherever you're starting from is great. It's enough. And you don't need to prove yourself to anybody. So.
That's great. Great advice on all fronts, and a great segue into our next question, which is you're both running to represent districts in the New York metro area, which is the kind of suburban districts that have been rapidly turning from red to purple to blue. A lot of that culminating in the 2018 blue wave, where Democrats took around 40 seats. How have you seen progressive infrastructure grow in your district, and why is your district ready for a true progressive in Congress? RT, do you want to go take that one first?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. The progressive infrastructure has grown, I mean, exponentially in our district, right? So I don't even know what groups we had or who the folks were, although we had, disparate folks who clearly were progressive, clearly had agendas, but that were absolutely about the people. But the 2016 election was a life-changing event for so many of us. I think we all became a lot more woke, a lot more educated, a lot more motivated to do to do way more than we had before. So for us in NJ-05, we have a loose group of something like 22 grassroots organizations that have come together. And we saw the fruits of that in 2018. I told you I supported my Congress member, and I tell the story of his sign being the first non-presidential sign I've ever had on my lawn. And so moving from there to when I was becoming disenchanted with him, but really still we all felt like we needed to keep this district blue. We have, these 20 something groups came together in this Indivisible coalition. We knocked on something like 30,000 doors for him all ourselves. That grassroots energy, that grassroots drive, that's not there for him in the primary. That's there for me. That's there for folks like me and Melanie, right? Because folks understand what we're fighting for, and we are part of this movement that is demanding real change, that is demanding our folks to be accountable. I will see that you can see that with real data as well. So our district in 2014 started trending blue. In 2016, Republicans still had a registration advantage. Today in 2020, we are solidly blue. We are 8,000 more Democrats registered than Republicans in all of NJ-05, which also includes some rural areas, that are thought to be a little bit more conservative. But includes all of it. We are solidly blue. The only way we're going to keep it blue is when we have a real Democrat in there, when we have a person who's actually fighting for the real policies that people want. Because when we fight for those policies, those are the ones that create value, that make life a better place for everybody. And this is how we keep the district blue, not just in 2020, but in 2022 and 2024, and so on and so forth. That's how we make our government better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I think too that there are these myths, right, with these purple districts or these districts where they're somewhat blue, but maybe don't go too blue. And for many folks who aren't really keyed into what's going on, we just believe them, right? Because, well, I don't pay attention, so I'm going to believe that person who knows. So if the party tells you, well, you have to be careful, you have to play it safe, you can't be too progressive, which I laugh at that word because, as we all know, it means progress, right? I think that we have to step into our power. We have, I don't even know how many indivisible groups at this point in the district, well over 15. We have other organizing groups and single issue groups as well. And these are the groups that have popped up to register voters, to do get out the vote, to canvass, to educate, to rally, to protest. These are the groups that have really overtaken, typically what we would see in a party structure. Certainly we still see, committee members collecting signatures, et cetera. But that energy, that palpable drive, that passion to push for change, that's not with the party anymore. That is with these external groups who are pushing for representatives that they want to elect because they want to feel represented. They want to fight for something. They want a government that they can believe in. In my district also trends blue. It's been a safe seat for 20 years, but we are not a D plus 25. But we are trending, more and more that way. And something that I would like to share, because I think, I'm very data driven as well, but you cannot discount that, that one-to-one interaction when you're at the doors, when you've been organizing for years in your particular area, you cannot discount that energy and that grassroots development, right? And that is what we have really seen here. And I'm so excited about it. Where I am, we're part of Northeast Queens, but we're North Nassau and a significant chunk of Northern and Suffolk County. And the further east you go out into Long Island, it's not known for necessarily for its more progressive electeds. That's why I'm thrilled to be running here, to really be pulling that infrastructure together and laying the foundation for something that we will be able to build on, in the next many elections. But having this palpable excitement and this growing energy, that something has shifted, that something has changed, and it's coming. And I think that is why you see so many electeds getting so nervous, because they know that they have folks like Arati and me and so many other progressive candidates that are now calling them out and holding them accountable in ways that they're just not used to. It's what our district deserves. It's what all Americans deserve. So thank you, Indivisible, for really just lighting that match so that we could all continue to, fan those flames. And now we have a fire and we're not stopping.
Well, thank you. And thanks to all of the Indivisibles who are watching tonight, who I know are the ones who are doing the work, who are doing the door knocking and the organizing and the phone calls that have powered the blue wave and that are going to power us to victory in 2020. On that note, I would love to hear a little bit about how your campaigns are adapting to the coronavirus crisis, both in terms of finding new ways to campaign and in terms of making sure residents have the resources that they need.
Yeah, I can take that first if that's okay. As I mentioned, we were one of the worst hits, right, out in Bergen County, especially in North Jersey. When it first came in, my husband actually is a physician at one of the hospitals that actually has the worst hit population, and still does. So for us in particular, in our family, it was very personal. Knowing friends and having family members who are frontline healthcare workers was both, meaningful, gratifying, and still remains pretty scary. And then, having friends in the community who are essential workers in other ways. There is not a single person I know who doesn't know somebody who's been affected, who's either sick or, recovering or unfortunately has passed away. So for us, when this happened, about a week before Bergen County shut down, I had actually canceled all of our in-person events. We had moved to digital and virtual, even before we knew what was really coming, because I, had an inkling from my husband, who was seeing more and more folks, with mysterious kind of things that are happening in the ICU and coming to the hospital. So we moved to digital and virtual, fairly quickly. I am lucky. I have a stellar staff who is just completely badass, if I can say that, and completely amazing. And so we quickly were up and running with our digital infrastructure, which we had invested in already. We were already making check-in calls. We were one of the first campaigns to start fundraising for food pantry, for donations for Center for Food Action. We started making check-in calls, within weeks, or within actually a week or two of moving all the way. And so to date, we've made over 65,000 phone calls. We've made over 40,000 texts, and majority of them have been checking in to see how folks are. And we have mutual aid resources that we partner with various other folks. And, we keep funneling things from the state as well and updating them on a daily basis. So we're really, really proud of being out there. We've also done PPE donations, fundraising for that, as well as donations for that from the community, as well as food donations and, a lot of the mutual aid that is so necessary. And I will add, it's been incredible. I'm sure Melanie agrees, right, with the mutual aid efforts that you all have been doing, that I've been noticing as well. It's amazing. It's meaningful. It feels like the world coming together and the community coming together when we do a lot of these mutual aid efforts. But it's not enough. And that is the scary and frustrating. And that is the thing that gives you a pit in your stomach every time you do these things, right? It is not enough. We should not be making cloth masks to give to nurses. Our frontline healthcare workers shouldn't have to worry about which mask they can wear and how many of them they can wear per day. At the end of the day, we shouldn't have folks who are relying on their neighbors to give them hot food. This is what the government is supposed to prepare for. We saw the pandemic coming a mile away. There are so many things we could have done to prepare for it. There's so many things we can still do as we're going through it. And to say that the government response has been inadequate is such an understatement. So for me, the mutual aid efforts have both been personally meaningful and something that my campaign, we all just did it without even talking about it or thinking about it. But at the same time, it is not enough. And it makes us fight even harder for the kinds of policies that we need. And I think I speak for our entire staff who have all been involved in these when I say that at the end of the day. So.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that, echo a lot of, I'm going to want to repeat a lot of what Arati said. We're doing very similar things with, food collections and PPE and delivering and helping folks in our communities and even folks that are outside of my district who need help as well. But I only see this happening with progressive candidates. I don't really see this happening with incumbents, with maybe the exception of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I haven't seen another sitting incumbent doing this kind of work in the community. And I think that speaks a great deal to the reason that progressives are running. Your question initially, Leah, was how did we transition? Just by nature, we have to be grittier. We have to be scrappier. We have to be more creative and innovative because we're not working with the same resources from a monetary perspective or even a connection perspective as a lot of our, opponents. And so I'm very thankful. I think in some ways, this pandemic disadvantages, challenger campaigns, of course, but in many ways, I think that we can leverage our strengths to overcome it. Broadly speaking, younger people tend to gravitate more toward progressive candidates because we're the ones fighting for their future and they see that. Younger people tend to be the more digitally savvy individuals. They're the expert at TikTok and Snapchat and all of these digital solutions of reaching folks in meaningful social platform ways. So I think that, it's leveraging that strength. I joke around with my staff a lot that we've been training for this our entire lives. When I was in high school, that's when dial-up started. So we are the internet generation. And, I think those things are really impactful. For me personally, we had a little bit of a hard time with our transition. My team is almost exclusively comprised of moms. Almost exclusively, but we have children that we're trying to homeschool now. My campaign manager, Tracy, she's probably watching, she had to step back because she got COVID, her husband got COVID. So we've had to do a lot of transitioning, but because my whole team is made up of women, women are used to doing this in society, right? We're used to juggling a million things. We're used to juggling work and family and community. So I'm quite proud of the way my team was able to really rally. And, I think that just is going to continue to fuel us right into June and hopefully push us over the finish line.
Well, thank you both. And thank you both for hanging in there and for innovating during a time that is incredibly hard for everyone personally and for all of our communities. So thank you. I'm going to turn to an audience question from Harry Walpert, who says, man, these problem solvers remind me why I am so glad that Marie Newman won the primary over one of them this year. For folks, that is Marie Newman, who beat Dan Lipinski in a suburban Chicago district about a month and a half ago. Harry asks, what has Marie Newman's win this year meant for all of you? Whoever wants to take that one.
Yeah, I think it's a lesson in not giving up, and it's a lesson in resiliency. And I think, the more progressives, and for me in particular, when women win, it's really empowering. So I think the more that we see that and the more that we normalize it, I think it fuels us, it gives us more confidence and motivates us to continue fighting harder than ever. And then I think for the future, it sets a really nice example for younger women who may be looking and saying, I don't like what's going on in my community, but how can I change it? That's been something that I've been, we talked a little bit about being a community advocate and what that means. I've started to identify women in my community that I want to groom to run. And I think that's what we we have to do. We have to look at those movers and those shakers, those doers, and say, let's go. We've got to bring you into this. You're amazing. Like, how can we, elevate you to do more for your community?
I will say for me, it was gratifying and completely meaningful. I was so happy when she won. Her model of how she ran her campaign against Dan Linsky is something that we're hoping that we plan to replicate in NJ-05. So for me, what was exciting was that, she put together this coalition, right, of not just progressive groups, but also groups that are a little bit more attractive to suburban mom voters, right? Or suburban voters in general, which is part of our district. And we are continuing to do that. So we are completely honored, excited to have the endorsement of Indivisible, which is one of the keystones to that, right? We're talking about suburban folks rising up in particular. I think Indivisible groups clearly are emblematic of that. But in addition, it's a coalition that also includes our coalition also includes endorsements from Working Families Party. We have endorsements from Moms in Office, Vote Mama, endorsements from in particular, Sunrise Hubs. We have 4 different Sunrise Hubs that have come together, Progressive Change Campaign Committee, and then also really proud of an organization called Common Defense. It's a veteran-led grassroots movement, grassroots organization. As a sister of veteran, being a sister of veteran, this is also particularly meaningful to me. And that particular endorsement is emblematic of what's happening, and I think what's going to continue to happen with the momentum that our campaign is gaining, right? So Common Defense has endorsed 4 other incumbents in New Jersey. So endorsed Andy Kim, endorsed Tom Malinowski, Mikey Sherrill, 3 other incumbents, not endorsed Josh Gottheimer, not endorsed my opponent, and instead have endorsed me. And I think that's the kind of energy, right? Like that's the kind of coalition that we're building, that we're putting forward. And those are the kinds of signals that we're sending to the voters about who we really are and what we really stand for. So for me, Marie Newman winning was, felt like a triumph, both for her, I was really happy, but also felt like, proof of principle for the kinds of things that we're doing in our district and the fact that they can win, especially because, frankly, the disappointments we've had with progressive primaries, coming up here, folks coming so close and not quite making it. So for me, it gave us a lot of hope, and it still continues to give us a lot of hope for July 7th.
That's great. That's great. And now I'm going to turn to talking about some of the policy issues that got us into this work in the beginning, and the things that you are interested in accomplishing in Congress. So first, Indivisible, one of the core issues that Indivisible really focuses on is democracy reform, because we recognize that while we got started in reaction to Donald Trump, he is a symptom of our problems. He is not the cause of our problems. And if we're going to take them on, we got to look at the structural problems that got us here in the first place. So what kinds of structural democracy reforms would you prioritize in Congress? Arati, do you want to take that one first?
Sure. Yeah. Structural democracy reforms. I mean, at the outset, we need to talk about voting rights. We need to talk about how we preserve voting rights, particularly in this pandemic crisis, make sure that we are able to do vote by mail, and that it's accessible to everybody. Because honestly, I don't want to have a recap of what happened, where we had folks in masks and putting their lives in danger in multiple different ways to vote. And I don't think that needs to happen. We need to absolutely make sure that our elections are secure, that they are fair, they're truly secure, truly fair. And I think that's really important. For me, that's the bedrock of our democracy. I will say I grew up, being the person who knew that voting was something that you look forward to when you're an adult. I was always taught this from my grandfather and my parents. My grandfather was a freedom fighter in India. So he took it very seriously. He took democracy and he felt like he had a real stake in creating democracy in India. And I think he taught all the rest of us that as well. So I bring that with me when I think about it here. And at the end of the day, we need to talk about the filibuster. We need to talk about where and how we have procedural things like motions to recommit. I mean, Problem Solvers Caucus are very famous for using MTRs as procedural votes as poison pills, essentially, to scuttle policies that folks have worked for so long. I think those are some of the important things that that are top of mind for me.
Town hall on voting reforms. Certainly, we need to push for, of course, protecting our elections. We need automatic voter registration. We need to make Election Day a federal holiday. We need to fix gerrymandering. But a big piece of this that I think we've been talking about this entire town hall is campaign finance reform. Right? We need to make sure we have publicly financed elections. And I think that will start to help shift the inequity model that we see. Congress legislates by and large, either for their corporate donors or through their own lens of experience. 5% of Congress is made up of moms. Such a small percentage of Congress is made up of women. We mostly see older white men legislating for other older white men, right? And so if we could institute a model of campaign finance reform and sort of try to even out that scale a little bit, maybe more of us progressives would get elected, right? It would just give us a little bit of help to get us in the door. So that's a huge one. And then, of course, we talked about ending Citizens United. That's very much a piece of this. This is a moment of crisis. Our democracy is in crisis, and it's going to take everybody. We need to pull as many people in. We need to continue to enfranchise voters, not disenfranchise voters rather. We need to make sure that we don't have Governor Kemp's purging voter rolls, right? We need to make sure that that we are protecting our elections. That is what makes our democracy so beautiful. And right now we are really in some risky waters here. So I'm glad to be running with folks like Arati so that we can make sure that we can protect our elections.
That's great. Thank you both.
Now, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I was going to add one thing. Melanie, you reminded me, especially because of gerrymandering, right? Both of us are in very gerrymandered district. In fact, NJ-05 is one of the letters in the gerrymandering district meme that was going around a while ago. I am not proud of that part at all. In here, the thing that is most important in terms of gerrymandering, in terms of how we're drawing our district, is who controls on the local and state level as well, in terms of making sure that we're involved not just in the federal level, congressional level like we are, but also down ballot. But the census is part of what is necessary to allocate resources, and especially with COVID-19, especially with the pandemic that's going around, the folks who are historically unlikely to fill out the census are even more unlikely to fill it out, or because they're housing insecure, may not be able to in multiple different ways. And I think that's a core part of what we also need to be pushing for this year. I think this is a pivotal year in multiple different ways. And I think that's a core part of democracy reform that we need to be paying more attention to.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree. So turning to healthcare, obviously healthcare is on everyone's minds due to the pandemic, and we are seeing that public opinion on Medicare for all or single payer healthcare is the highest it's been in a while, at around 54 to 55% favorable. Is now the time to implement a Medicare for all healthcare plan?
Yes, it is. It's past the time to implement a single payer healthcare program. I think we are seeing it now more than ever. Behavioral change is hard, and science tells us that most folks are not going to change their behavior unless something interacts with them, unless they have a very close experience with it. And now we are seeing folks who understand that their neighbors are losing their jobs and therefore their health insurance. They're understanding that there's a whole population of people potentially in their community that does not have health insurance, that puts them at risk. They understand that they may be losing their job soon, which in turn may make them lose their health insurance. And I think it's really turned this idea on its head that health insurance belongs with employment. And I think for many people, they're starting to realize that healthcare really is a human right. And, we're seeing this more and more we're hearing this from centrists more and more, that healthcare is a human right. Well, if they believe it's a human right, then they need to sign on to the only healthcare solution that treats it as a human right, which is single payer healthcare, Medicare for all. The public option does not do that. The public option is better than where we are today, of course, but it does not go all the way. It would still leave millions of people without health insurance and so many folks underinsured. It's the same same problem we have today. And it would be way more expensive than what a single payer healthcare system would yield. So I think that, yes, absolutely, we need this. And I think this is an opportunity for us to decide who we are as a country and who we want to be. We're one of the wealthiest countries in the world. We should be able to provide this as a right to Americans and everyone who lives here.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, 100%. My answer, the short answer is yes. The slightly longer answer is amplifying what Molly said. Healthcare is a human right. When I announced in July of last year, when I said that Medicare for all, single payer healthcare system is the cornerstone of what I'm fighting for, people kind of went, not sure. NJ-05, are you sure this is something that you should be advocating for? The conversation shifted through the primary season, even through January and February of this year, where we had so many more folks willing to talk about what that meant, willing to try and understand what that meant. And then the pandemic hit. A few short weeks, I saw much more of a shift in our conversations within our community, within the district, that really even hadn't happened in the 8 or 9 months that I thought was actually, quite a substantial shift, right? It's because of what Melanie mentioned. So many more people understand that healthcare are so affected, understand that healthcare should never have been tied to our jobs, should never be tied with our employment. And for me, I think that being able to talk about that and being able to fight for that is clearly a key thing that we need to do going forward, because it's not just about folks right now dealing with healthcare, right? It's about the long-term repercussions of this pandemic that are going to reverberate for a very long time. So even when you talk about folks who've had COVID-19, who are recovered, there is long-term permanent kidney damage. There are potentials with lung disease that happen over time. Folks who have cardiovascular disease are much more likely to need long-term care. I mean, and that's just with one particular infection or one particular thing with COVID-19. I mean, we can talk about so many other healthcare implications that have to do with this moving forward. Clearly, if we want our society to be more resilient, we need to start taking care of all of our things. And so if we want that, the folks who are going to scuttle this, just like the public option that Melanie mentioned was scuttled, right? It scuttled because of one person, Joe Lieberman. And I would say that the Problem Solvers Caucus, folks who are in the Problem Solvers Caucus, play a very similar role. So if we want something like a single payer system, if we want to actually change our healthcare system substantially to actually take care of folks, instead of just pay lip service to a lot of things that are happening, we need to make sure that we don't have folks from the Problem Solvers Caucus elected again. I mean, that's just it at the end of the day, because their answer to everything seems to be tax credits. And at the end of the day, tax credits are not substantial policy changes, right? I mean, those are not what is going to make sure that we're saving our most vulnerable, whether it is because of Medicare, but whether it's because of climate change or any of the host of other things that we're talking about. So yeah, if you're actually serious about wanting to overhaul our healthcare system, we should make sure that Problem Solvers Caucus members are not reelected.
Just add super quick, for so long we were told that it was this radical idea, healthcare for everybody. That's so radical. I tell this quick little story about before the fire department was socialized, because that's what it is. It's a socialized service. Before it was socialized, folks had to pay insurance in order for firemen to come and put out their fire. They had to put a plaque outside their building. So if your building was on fire and the fire truck came, if you had a plaque there, they would put out the fire. If the plaque wasn't there, guess what would happen? They would let your building burn. That is radical, right? But guess what? That is how we treat people in today's healthcare system. If someone has uncontrolled diabetes, or someone has cancer or AIDS and doesn't have money to pay for it, what do? We essentially let that person die. Right? That is radical. Wanting everybody to have access to healthcare is the opposite of radical. It's humane. So this is the choice, I think, when, to Arati's point, when you talk about these folks that are lobbying for tax credits or supporting policies that don't solve the problem. It's not a solution. It's a cover-up, right? So this is why this election is so important. Whereas the presidential election may be a battle for the soul of our country, these these primaries, these congressional primaries, are a battle for the soul of our party.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Well, and then turning to climate change, we know the science says that we don't have much time to address climate change before it's too late. The Green New Deal is all about facing that crisis head on and making sure we don't leave anyone behind in the transition. What part of the Green New Deal framework do you think is most important for your district?
So I will say all of it. To be honest, look, at the end of the day, the Green New Deal is the only framework right now that is actually going to move us in a direction where, one, we're jumpstarting our economy in a real sustainable way, right? In a way that is actually going to substantially create green jobs, that is going to increase our green infrastructure, that is going to break us free from our fossil fuel addiction, which we need to be broken free of if we're actually ever going to do anything close to mitigating climate change. It is clear. I have a Congress member who refuses to use the phrase climate change when he's talking to constituents in our district. That is so far away from the Green New Deal that it's mind-boggling. If you can't even define the problem, if you can't even say the words, I'm not sure how committed you are to doing anything about it, except insofar as to lobby for corporations and lobby for folks that are only going to line their pockets and not actually do anything about my kids, their kids, or our planet's future at the end of the day. Being in North Jersey, being in that conduit, that is sort of the Northeast conduit and being so close to New York City, I will say infrastructure in particular is quite important. But that goes hand in hand in making sure that we are moving away from fossil fuel projects, right? So we have a number of fossil fuel projects that are supposed to add for energy to make us more resilient, for New Jersey transit projects or other things that deal with infrastructure. Absolutely, we need to be more resilient. Absolutely. New Jersey is one of the most vulnerable states to climate change. We are the third fastest warming state in the entire United States. We are still reeling from Superstorm Sandy. In fact, my municipality, as a council member, we just received the last of our Sandy funds this year. Right? We're not a coastal town. We were very well affected by this. We will continue to be. Those 100, 200-year storms are really commonplace, as we all know. As a council member who actually has to allocate resources, I understand completely how much more we have to do because of climate change. And it's as simple as potholes, how many potholes we fill, and what kind of resources that we give towards that. It's an everyday life issue at the end of the day. So for me, the infrastructure is particularly meaningful. It's something that is going to be really important for my district. But if we're talking about the Green New Deal, it is absolutely the only way we're going to be jumpstarting our economy in the post-COVID-19 world. And we need to be able to do that with all the urgency with which we came together for this pandemic crisis. With all the urgency, all the solidarity, and the sense that what we're doing is the same thing, because we do have a crisis that is looming that is just as bad as this pandemic crisis that we're going through right now. So.
I would echo that. In some cases, all of it is important. I think it's important to note that the Green New Deal, which is transitioning to renewable energy, reducing greenhouse gases, and ushering in a green new economy and prioritizing frontline communities, it's not something that is unique to one state or one congressional district. This is going to need to be done in concert with the entire world if it's to be effective, right? But for my district in particular, we are a coastal community. My entire district borders a shoreline. We've seen deteriorating shores for years now. We also, in the majority of my district, so my district is a little bit of New York City and Long Island, as I mentioned, the Long Island portion of my district accesses its drinking water from aquifers, which are highly polluted. And as seas are rising, they're pushing in on our aquifer system, and it's causing saltwater intrusion. That water is not drinkable. So we're going to have a water security issue. Within our aquifer systems, we have the largest plume in the country. A plume is essentially a ball of pollution. This particular ball of pollution is like 2 miles by 4 miles, and it's growing every day, and it's highly carcinogenic. Now, the scientist in me knows that correlation and causation are two different things, but we have seen a higher rate of cancer in the area around the plume. Interestingly, our local newspaper just did an expose that showed the company, which happens to be a donor to my opponent, Long Island's biggest polluter, is responsible for this plume and has known about it for 40 years. And further, elected officials have known about the dangers of this plume and have not done anything to remediate it. Now, my opponent, before he was sitting in Congress, was the Nassau County executive who served over Nassau County, which is where this plume is located. So we have a huge issue, from large scale climate change to our shores deteriorating to a serious water security issue. So we're going to need to address all of it. And to echo Artie's point about this being the opportunity, right? We hear all the time that a Green New Deal is not realistic because we wouldn't be able to transition like that. We are on essentially a national pause. We are going to have to rebuild our economy. And this may be the only opportunity in our lifetimes where we're able to really reach out and grab that opportunity and build for the future and save a planet for our children and our grandchildren. So I think, there's tremendous responsibility here. There's tremendous opportunity here. But I'll tell you one thing, electeds who are taking money from the biggest polluters in the fossil fuel industry are not serious about fixing this issue, or not serious about fighting climate change.
Agreed on all fronts. So we're going to take one more question from the audience. Krishna Chalise asks, who are your political idols?
Wow, there's so many of them. I don't know, maybe we can go back and forth, Artie. I don't want to monopolize all the time. Stacey Abrams, I'm a big fan of hers. RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, how do you not love her? I think that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, what she's done for the movement, has been pretty incredible. I'm very just blown away by so many of my progressive fellow candidates, like Arati. She'd be one of my heroes. It's mostly women, I guess, that really speak to me and motivate me to continue to push for the change that we need.
I will echo Melanie. I think that particularly in this moment we're in, for me, I get the most inspiration from really strong women who are fighting really hard. And whether that's in politics or elsewhere, to me, that gives me the will to fight even harder on behalf of folks, whether that's, an advocate mom that is part of my team, that is part of my kitchen cabinet, and to whom I look up to, and really gain the courage from, to Maxine Waters, to AOC, to, Bonnie Watson Coleman in particular in New Jersey, all of these women, Stacey Abrams, I agree with, all the ones that Melanie said. I will add Leah here as well for being somebody who is able to show us by example what courage looks like and what standing up looks like. I think that is what has been missing in politics for so long, right? So we talk about our campaigns. We talk about what we're trying to do in NJ-05. And I think to a certain extent, I think what all of these Indivisible campaigns are trying to do, right? Which is to beat back this politics of fear that has been ingrained in us, right? We vote, I feel, as if out of fear. And I think what we need to do is to vote out of courage and real optimism, right? And be able to say that we can take that power and that we can make a real change. And that it's not just about, well, if we don't vote like this, something bad is going to happen. It's about, let's make something really good happen. Let's actually help people. And I think that shift is exactly what I think Melanie was talking about earlier. That shift is what we've been seeing since 2016 in the middle of this cataclysm, right? Political cataclysm that we've gone through, and even in the middle of this pandemic. And I think that's what gives me hope. So moving forward, and I think that's what fuels my campaign at the end of the day.
Give people something to vote for, right? I think that's always a winning strategy when you can do that. And I think that's why a lot of us have been so successful. You know, I know you mentioned earlier, Arati, that sometimes progressives get so close and they don't quite get over the finish line in the primary, but they've just blown the door wide open, either for their next run or for someone else to run. And I think that speaks to the greater movement, right? I think I draw so much motivation from the movement in general, even on my darkest days, right? I'm on my toughest days. I look and see, well, you know what? We've done so much for the movement collectively, and that's only going to continue to grow. So the more that we can do that and uplift each other instead of stomp on each other, which, you know, I think is really, I hope is a time of the past. I'm seeing just so many incredible women want to show up for each other in just really beautiful ways. And I'm so thankful for that. And I'm so encouraged for that. And I'm ready to really do that myself and model that behavior as you and I, Arati, cruise toward our primaries and hopefully bring home big wins.
Well, and thank you both, because this is so inspiring and so exciting. And I personally am just feeling really energized having the chance to spend this time with you. So for all the folks who are watching and who are wondering how they can help, can you each tell us how people can get involved and how they can help your campaigns?
Sure. Absolutely. You can reach us at our website, D'Arrigo2020.com. That's DARRIGO 2020.com. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook at D'Arrigo for Congress, and I'm on Twitter at D'Arrigo Melanie.
Similar, we're all over social media as well as on the website. My website is Arati for Congress, so it's ARETI for Congress.com. Please volunteer. Please donate if you can. I will speak for both Melanie and me here in saying that small dollar donations and any contribution especially for grassroots movement like ours, are extremely important, and they go a long way. I think for all of us in trying to make this happen. It's difficult to go against somebody whose nickname is the human fundraising machine, but it's absolutely the right thing to do. And I would encourage any and everybody to get involved, to volunteer from afar. We're taking volunteers. We'd love to have you as part of our communities. I'm sure Melanie would as well. So thank you.
I'll just echo, these are campaigns that are not going to be funded by private equity donors who are looking to get their next phone call returned when they get or by somebody in Congress. These are campaigns that are funded by people like you. So think about whether you can support and think about how you're going to get involved. On that note, would love to just have a couple of minutes for each of y'all to do a closing statement about anything else you want folks to know about you, why you're in the race, and what you're hoping to do.
Okay, great.
Arati, do you want to take that first?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. I started off telling you all the different perspectives that I have. I think there's only one real perspective that is the most important, right? Which is, why am I doing this? I'm doing this because my district deserves better. I think because we all deserve better. And I'm doing this because at the end of the day, I will echo what I said multiple times today. The only way we're going to have real change happen is when we have bold, passionate, courageous leaders who are going to stand up to the establishment, who are going to actually represent the real democratic values and create real substantive change for everybody. And it's not just about one person. It's really about all of us coming together to make sure that that happens. It's about all of us holding all of our elected officials accountable. 2020 is the year that we do it, because I am going to fight like hell to make sure Trump is not president in 2021. But when 2021 rolls around, we have a lot of work to do. And if we have folks like our opponents who are part of the Problem Solvers Caucus, it is a guarantee. It is a guarantee that we are getting nothing substantial done, that we are not actually moving the ball for anybody, most especially not for people who are the most vulnerable and people who need to be taken care of the most. And we're not advancing democracy, and we're not advancing our society. So if you want any of that to happen, please make sure you're part of this movement. And I hope that both Melanie and I have your support. So thank you.
That was great. Thanks, Arati. For me, this election comes down to value systems. It comes down to whether or not we want a government who's representative of the people or representative of corporations. And I think, and I'm going to share my little campaign mantra that I always tell my team and my supporters: we can have nice things. We can have nice things, but it's going to be on us. We have to be courageous enough to make some phone calls, to talk to our friends, to make some donations, to get in the game and participate in this thing we call democracy. Because if you don't participate, you may end up very unhappy. We need everybody in here. It's going to take every single one of us pushing with everything that we have to elect representation that's fighting for us. We have to do it for our children. We have to do it for our grandchildren. We have so many courageous folks stepping up and running. I've been trying to support them as much as I can. I hope you will too. I'm so proud of Arati here and the campaign that she's built. I'm so proud of the campaign that I have built. So I'm going to echo and do that plug. If you can volunteer for either one of us, my primary is June 23rd. Hers is June 7th, right? June 7th? 7th?
July 7th.
Oh, July 7th. I'm sorry. That's what I got. July 7th. So we're very close. We can use all the extra help. If you can spare some time, if you can spare some money, we would appreciate it. We have the opportunity. We have the opportunity right now to pass real people-centered legislation. I don't know if we're going to get an opportunity like this again. So please become a part of it. Join us. Join this movement because it will benefit all of us. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm still so pumped. I can't believe that I'm on a town hall with Indivisible. This is like so exciting.
Thank you. Well, so the two lessons I'm taking from tonight are: one, vote out of courage, not out of fear, and two, we can have nice things. And with that, I want to also just be sure to close and recognize the Indivisible groups who have been out there fighting for these campaigns: Indivisible New Jersey 5th, Indivisible Nassau County, Empire State Indivisible. I know I'm missing some folks. Everybody who comes together to make grassroots campaigns possible, really want to and who makes a night like tonight possible. So thank you all. Thank you, Arati and Melanie. It has been wonderful to spend this time with you. It is really inspiring, and we are cheering you on from all over the country. So thank you, and have a lovely night.